This wasn't just a canceled visit. This was a calculated disappearance that exposed a royal family fracture nobody can keep hiding anymore. A grandfather waiting, a reunion planned, and then suddenly silence. No children. No explanation that actually holds. Just a story that keeps changing every single day.
Growing calls for Prince William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, to keep Archie and Lily away from Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis at all costs.
Nothing, as we've seen, nothing about them is unique. Nothing about them is inherently interesting, with the exception of his family.
King Charles has grandchildren he's barely met. This week, they were finally supposed to meet him. Then, days before the trip, it all fell apart. No helicopter, no police protection, no Frogmore Cottage, and insiders say the real reason Archie and Lilibet aren't coming has nothing to do with security at all. And that's where everything starts to feel off, because this wasn't some last-minute hiccup. This was a full-scale collapse. Plans were moving, expectations building, insiders whispering that this would finally be the moment the distance ended. Then suddenly nothing. No arrival. No reunion. Just excuses that don't line up when you actually look at them closely.
Yes, it would be nice. I was saying it's nice for them to get to know each other. But it's been so long, and you don't know if Archie and Lily are civilized, right? They might eat with their toes and, pick things up with their feet. I don't know what's been going on because they've been living on the frickin' compound like children of the corn, and like the hills have eyes, and we never hear from them.
Being sold as the moment. Prince Harry back in Britain to mark the one-year countdown to the Invictus Games. And this time, maybe, just maybe, with Meghan and the children finally joining him. It didn't happen. Harry submitted a formal request for police protection. Denied. His team asked about a royal helicopter to move the family around safely. Denied, blocked, refused. But here's the question nobody wants to sit with for too long. Why was everything hinging on conditions that were never guaranteed in the first place? Why build a reunion around demands that could collapse it overnight, unless the collapse itself was always part of the pattern?
As if he has learned nothing in the last 6 years of battling with RAVIC, the Royal and VIP Executive Committee that decides which personages in public life receive an official taxpayer-funded security detail, Harry went off like an IED, where once again he was denied official police protection for the family, and as a source close to Harry briefed, the rug was pulled out from under their feet at the 11th hour. That was to the Guardian newspaper.
They do this every year. The announcement, the drama, the will, they won't they. And then nothing. Every year, the same rhythm, the same rising tension, the same emotional setup followed by an abrupt withdrawal. At what point does coincidence turn into strategy? Because patterns like this don't just happen. They're repeated, refined, controlled.
Harry is apparently distraught at the development, which isn't a development at all, but the same stance RAVIC has taken for the last 6 years and was under review again. Until RAVIC gives another verdict, the status quo is unchanged. The baffling thing about both Harry and Meghan is their repeated tendency to make premature announcements before the underlying facts have been nailed down. Indeed, all their troubles of the last 6 years have stemmed from their magical thinking that something they want will become instant reality, starting with Megxit itself.
It's almost a ritual at this point, but this time feels different because this time it's not just about Harry. It's about two children who have now gone their entire lives without knowing their own grandfather. And the question everyone keeps circling back to is simple. If this was really just about security, why does the story keep changing every single day? That question hangs there for a reason, because every version of the story contradicts the last. One day it's security, the next day it's logistics, then suddenly it's timing. But if the threat is so serious, why does the narrative shift so easily? Real danger doesn't need rewriting. It stays consistent, it stays urgent. This keeps evolving depending on who's talking. And while all of this noise was building, something else was happening quietly, almost too quietly.
And the current British Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, was definitely going to be on his side with regards to these threats, these problems that he has.
And here's the detail that makes it sting even more. While this circus was playing out, Catherine was quietly finishing a physical challenge most people twice her age couldn't manage. The 3 peaks back-to-back, no fanfare demanded, no security showdown, no helicopter requests. 2 very different Windsors, 2 very different weeks. One of them made headlines for showing up, the other made headlines for not. 2 completely different approaches. One side showing up without demands, the other unable or unwilling to arrive without conditions. And suddenly, this isn't just about a missed visit. It's about contrast, optics, control, stick around, because what's actually going on behind the scenes.
Challenge was truly incredible. By the way, let me just show you actually what it involves to climb the 3 peaks, because you have to be so physically fit to do so. And for Catherine, this is something that meant a huge amount to her, given that she knew that there was going to need to be significant physical recovery from her cancer treatment if she was going to take on such a feat. What I particularly love about it too is that she didn't tell anyone that she was doing this. There would have had to be a huge amount of training going on.
Is a lot messier than a security dispute. Here's a theory that's been gaining serious traction, and it's not coming from nowhere. It's coming from royal insiders and from the pattern of behavior we've watched play out for 6 years. Some believe the children were never really the point. They were the leverage. Think about it. Every time this family wants headlines, wants a reaction out of the king, wants to remind the palace they still exist, Archie and Lilibet get mentioned. Not seen mention a photo here, a rumor there, maybe next time whenever the timing is inconvenient for someone else in the family. And that's where the story turns from emotional to strategic. Because if the children are always talked about but never seen, if they appear in headlines but never in reality, then what are they really becoming? A connection or a bargaining chip? Ask Scott Wimbledon, trooping the color Catherine's own milestone moment. There's a darker read on this too, one that keeps coming up again and again, that keeping the children away isn't a failure of planning at all. It's the plan. As long as the grandchildren stay a mystery, they stay valuable. The moment Charles gets real, unsupervised access, that leverage disappears. And suddenly, the silence makes sense, because mystery holds power, distance creates demand, and access ends the story. If the meeting actually happens, if the relationship becomes real and unscripted, then everything changes. The leverage disappears. The narrative collapses. So maybe this wasn't a failed reunion at all. Maybe it was a perfectly executed delay. And if that's true, then the real question isn't why the children didn't come. It's whether they were ever meant to. But just when you think this story is only about distance and delay, something even colder starts to surface. Something that explains why the door isn't just closed, it's quietly being sealed shut from the inside. Because while the public is still debating security, the people behind palace walls are talking about something far more permanent, a silence that isn't temporary, a separation that may already be final. The truth is, this isn't just about a father and a son anymore. It's about a brother who has already moved on without saying a word. Because the most chilling detail isn't what's being said publicly, it's what's no longer being said at all. There was a time when every disagreement between them still carried emotion, anger, frustration, even hope. But now, nothing. No mentions, no reactions, just absence. And in families like this, absence is louder than any argument. There was a moment that should have changed everything: a wedding, a private family gathering, the kind of event where old wounds sometimes soften. But the invitation never came. Not delayed, not lost, never sent. And that wasn't a mistake. That was a message. A quiet, unmistakable signal that whatever existed before has already been filed away as something that no longer needs revisiting. And when the one person who shared your childhood, your history, your trauma stops even acknowledging your name, that's not distance. That's detachment. And suddenly, the security narrative starts to feel even weaker. Because if the real issue was danger, wouldn't the family close ranks instead of drifting further apart? Wouldn't there be urgency instead of indifference? But what we're seeing is the opposite, a gradual, almost clinical withdrawal, like someone has already decided the situation isn't worth fixing anymore. Then comes the contradiction that cracks the entire story wide open, because while all of this talk of danger dominates headlines, there was that moment quiet, almost unnoticed when everything fell apart. A simple doorbell, a normal street, no chaos, no panic, no visible threat, just a man standing there completely unbothered, moving through London without anyone even realizing until it was over. And if that's possible, if he can exist in that space without incident, then how real is the danger being described? And that's when comparisons start creeping in, whether anyone likes it or not. Other public figures facing real, documented threats still show up, still move, still exist in the world despite the risk. They don't disappear from entire countries because of it. They adapt. they manage, they continue. So why is the one place that seems impossible to enter the very place where family is waiting? That question lingers because it doesn't have a comfortable answer. And the longer it hangs there, the more people start looking somewhere else entirely. Not at security, not at logistics, but at control. Control over timing, control over access, control over narrative. Because when appearances only happen under specific conditions, those conditions become power. And that power doesn't just affect the palace. It's starting to ripple outward. Even the one space that should remain untouched Invictus is beginning to feel the pressure. Because unlike everything else, that commitment isn't flexible. It isn't optional. It requires presence. Real presence. Not statements. Not videos. Not carefully managed appearances from a distance. And that creates a tension that can't be easily explained away. If the threat is real, then showing up becomes risky. But if showing up is required, then the narrative has to adjust. And when narratives adjust, people notice. At the same time, something else has been shifting quietly but unmistakably. Public perception. The tone has changed. The reactions are different now. Moments that once would have generated sympathy are now being questioned. Patterns that once felt coincidental are now being connected. And once people start connecting patterns, it becomes very hard to unsee them. Even outside the palace, the ground doesn't feel as stable as it once did. The momentum that carried everything forward in the beginning has slowed. Opportunities that once seemed guaranteed have faded. And with that, the scrutiny has sharpened. Not just about what's being said, but about what's being done behind the scenes. Questions about decisions, about intentions, about the long-term plan. And when those questions start piling up, they don't just disappear. They build, which brings everything back to the one detail that keeps cutting through all the noise. Time. Because while strategies can be extended and narratives can be adjusted, time doesn't pause for any of it. A grandfather is getting older, 2 children are growing up, and every delay, every missed moment, every carefully managed absence is something that can't be undone later. So maybe the real story isn't about security at all. Maybe it's about something much quieter and much more final. A family slowly accepting a version of reality where certain doors no longer open, where certain relationships are no longer repaired, where silence isn't temporary, it's the outcome. And if that's true, then the most unsettling part isn't what's happened so far. It's what happens when no one tries to change it anymore.